Morning, everybody. If you have already flipped to Zechariah chapter 5, that's where we're going to be this morning. I'll encourage you to put a bookmark there or something. So sorry, if you were here Wednesday night, you're going to get double dosed. We're going to talk about something briefly before we begin our study this morning. So we did recently have our elders and deacons meeting, followed by the business meeting. And one of the topics that came up during the elders and deacons meetings was our Bible school class situation. So, it's always challenging for the deacon in charge of that. Tom has great appreciation for what Michael's dealing with to recruit teachers for the classes, whatever level, be it children or adults, right? But that's become particularly acute here for the upcoming fall quarter. A number of teachers who have taught in the past have not turned in their teacher volunteer forms for the upcoming year. Now, for some, that may be they need to step back for a little while and take a break. I get that. It can be very tiring. We don't want anybody burnt out. So I do respect that if you need to take a break, take a break. If you just forgot to fill out your form and give it to Michael, please do that. Michael is trying to work out a schedule, for an entire year so that he can avoid burning people out by assigning them too many times. So my question was, do we have members, not just those who have taught in the past and haven't done their forms, but do we have members who aren't currently in the teaching rotation that would like to, or would even think about it? Maybe in your mind that's not something that you thought you could do, but I want you to consider doing that. So we're going to talk about that briefly before we begin our regular study this morning. So why might you not be doing it already? Maybe you've never taught before. That can be a little intimidating, being asked to teach others on a topic that maybe you don't feel that you have mastered yourself, right? I get that. Have you ever considered being a helper for one of the current teachers? Now, hopefully I don't need a helper in here teaching the adult class, but you never know. Maybe somebody up here standing watching you too will help me catch things like comments and questions that I miss. But particularly in the younger children's classes, that's an enormous help to have a helper with you, right? Things come up in those classes, and if you have 5 small children and one has an emergency, you can't just leave the other 4 and hope that it all goes well, right? So having a helper is an enormous assistance in that. But hopefully if you're assisting, you're going to grow in your comfort level and be willing to take that on yourself at some point, teaching once you see how it's done, that it doesn't have to be intimidating for you, and you're going to discover just how rewarding that is. In my own case, you might think that Todd was the one who convinced me to teach, but not the case. It was Jim Kimball. Don't know how many of you know Jim. Jim suggested to me one quarter, hey, I'm teaching the high school class next quarter. Why don't you come help me? And he shamed me into it. Good for him. He shamed me into it. And I went and helped him. And as luck would have it, we were about 3 or 4 weeks into that quarter when one of the difficulties that Jim has had health-wise struck him. And I taught the rest of the quarter. So it wasn't a whole lot of introductory time. But to Jim's credit, he was a great mentor in that even though he couldn't come up necessarily and participate or lead the class, he was giving me ideas and he was encouraging me and things of that nature. So, I kind of got thrown into it on a quick scale. I would encourage you to spend a quarter or more volunteering with someone and getting accustomed to that environment and how you might conduct a class. Maybe you think you don't know enough about the Bible yourself to be teaching others. If we all let that stand in our way, no one would ever teach anyone else, because none of us will ever understand it completely or perfectly. We understand to the best of our ability. We should be continuing to grow in our understanding as well. just like we're hoping those people we're teaching are going to grow. If you're talking about the young people classes, it's not like you need to start from scratch. Michael's done an excellent job of working out themes or plans for our lessons, right? And he does a great job of finding materials to help you support with those lessons. So it's not as though somebody's handing you a topic and saying, here, go figure out how to teach this topic. You've got materials to help you. You've got study guides, you've got stories, you've got activities that all support that curriculum that we're studying. If you're teaching an adult class like this one, they're either going to be a themed class, meaning we're talking about a particular theme or idea, or they're going to be textual, like our studies currently are in the post-exilic prophets and Hebrews on Wednesday nights, right? So the textuals I find a lot easier to prepare for because I'm looking at a collection of material and a concept that keeps running. Yes, I need to go and find external material, other places in the Bible that help support concepts there, but I find that so much easier to do a textual study, right? We have a textual study coming up this summer that the men of the congregation lead on Sunday mornings. There are still, I believe, 4 open slots there. It's a great opportunity for someone to go outside their comfort zone and try doing this in a manner that is less difficult to start out with. It's a textual study, right? And in particular, when it comes to the adult class this summer, you only need to become a quasi-expert on 1 week's topic. You don't need to be an expert for the whole quarter. That's a lot less demanding. Said here, put a note here to read Acts chapter 4, verse 13. And this relates to you have to be an expert to teach. Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated, common men, they were astonished and that they recognized that they had been with Jesus. And I have a note here. True, we haven't traveled with Jesus. We didn't get to witness his ministry for years and see the things he taught. But we have the record of it right here. We can read and learn about that. We can become just as affected by the things that Jesus taught and did as the men who got to witness it happen. Peter and his companion here are said to be uneducated men. They didn't go to college. They didn't do advanced studies. They simply relayed the things that they had learned. And that's all we're asking teachers to do, is to share the things you're learning with other people. Maybe you feel you don't have enough time to prepare. Or that you can't commit to being at services to teach every week, right? We do have situations that are beyond people's control. I can remember when we lived in Charleston and Danetta worked at the hospital. She was scheduled to work every other weekend. That wasn't a choice. We have members here that have work schedules that are beyond their control. I appreciate that. There are other things you can do. Perhaps you can volunteer to be that helper then the weeks that you can be here. Maybe you can work it out with somebody else who, on the weeks you can't be here, you do it as a team effort. Maybe you teach it together, and each of you teaches, when you can be here. There are different ways you can approach it. But I came up with these couple of questions I want you to think about. If we feel like we can't make time to prepare to teach, what are the things we do make time for in our lives? Do we make time for our favorite TV shows? Probably. Do we make time for our favorite hobbies and activities? We sure do. So if we're saying we can make time for those things, but we can't make time to teach others, what does that say about our priorities? When it comes to children, our actions speak louder than words. If they witness in us that we're unwilling to spend that time preparing, that our faith isn't our top priority, can we ever expect them to make their faith their top priority? I can appreciate for those of you who have children, been there. I look back in our own times and we did not volunteer to teach on Wednesday nights when the girls were in school and old enough to play sports because we had no control over their sports schedules, right? So being away for a Wednesday game, no control over that. But that didn't mean we couldn't teach on Sunday mornings. Or maybe you're the other situation. You can't be here consistently on a Sunday morning, but you can be here consistently on a Wednesday evening. There's an opportunity. And I guarantee you, Michael will work with you to find a time that you can fulfill use the talents that you've been given to do that. Maybe from quarter to quarter it was different for you. So I think, again, thinking back to our situation, when it came to the summer quarters, it was more challenging for us to commit to being here on Sundays because we had travel sports. And that usually meant tournaments. And tournaments were done on weekends. So while we would go to the church where we were at the tournament that Sunday, we weren't here to participate, right? So again, getting back to people like Michael will work with you on situations like that. So I had a note here to read Hebrews 10, 23 through 25. Paul was writing to Jewish Christians. We've just actually gone through this in the last month or so on Wednesday evenings. It says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without a wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." So again, it gets back to that question, if you're not here when we gather together, again, I understand there are situations that are beyond people's control. But if it's because we lack the commitment to be here, that is, again, an example we are setting to the young people who see us. So I also had a note here that it's not only incumbent upon us as Christians to gather together and support one another, but we're to be active participants. And hopefully when you come here, you're not coming here just to sit and hear what's said. You're coming to worship God, to be a participant in our services, and to serve him in the ways that he's equipped you to serve. Randy's an excellent speaker, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot out of his message this morning, but I hope you came for more than just to hear what Randy has to say this morning. Teaching others is an expectation as we mature in our Christian walk, is it not? Now, I would never ask a new Christian to sit down and teach a class. That would be unfair. They're learning the beginnings themselves, are they not? Now, if they've learned enough fundamentals, they've learned enough to reach the point where they've recognized that there's something I have to do to begin this relationship. Okay? So in that respect, even a new Christian has things they can teach someone else who's had no exposure to the Word, the reasons that led them to make that commitment, and the steps that were necessary to make it happen. There's always going to be someone who has started that walk more recently than we have, that we can help bring them up to where we are. Paul made this clear in his second letter to Timothy. So if we turn to 2 Timothy. And if you're close enough to see, yes, I have little sticky notes in my Bible to take me there, so I'm terrible at flipping to the right place. So we're going to read verses 1 and 2. And I think Tom even touched on this Wednesday night. It says, "You then, my child, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And Tom talked Wednesday night about the fact that the term that it's often translated here as men in various translations doesn't specifically mean male people. It means mankind. Now, there are proper situations for ones to be teaching others, but this applies to women just as equally as men. There are people women can teach, and you are learning so that you can help those people by teaching them as well. The next question is, are you using the talents that God has given you in his service? Are you thinking that, hey, teaching isn't one of the talents God gave me? He's given me some things, and there's ways I can serve him, but teaching is not one of them. That's intimidating, right? Despite having taught the high school class for probably a couple of years, I can tell you that the first time I taught the adult class, when we were sitting in the multi-purpose room, you could have wrung my shirt out and filled a bucket. I was so nervous. But I got through it. And the more I did it, the less of the bucket I filled. But that's okay. You can be nervous about it. That's one of the challenges, right? Overcoming our fears to serve God. So I had to read Matthew 25. This one's a long one. Sorry. 14 through 30, it's the story of, it's the parable of the talents, right? For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and I gather where I have scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So do you think that story is really about being a smart businessman? Not at all. The idea here is that God gives each of us talents and abilities to be able to serve him. What do we do with them? Sometimes we don't even recognize them in ourselves. It takes someone else to see and encourage it out of us, right? But if our response is to take that talent or ability that God has given us and hide it because we're afraid to use it, then we're just like the 1 talent servant here in the parable. we've failed to use what he gave us, and we're going to be an unfaithful and unuseful servant to God. On the other hand, it wasn't about the 5-talent man going out and being so successful trading. It was his ability to use the talents that he'd been given. And that's what God asks of us. And I wanted to point out in the entire story, the shortcoming of the 1-talent servant wasn't because he was only given 1 talent. It was because he chose not to make use of that talent. So whether you're someone that God has given many talents to, and there are a lot of things you can do to contribute to his work, that's fantastic. Use them. If he's given you a few to use the few that he's given you. If he's given you just 1, make sure you use the 1. To be a faithful servant, all you really have to do is use those talents God has given you. So all of this sounds like a negative, doesn't it? I'm telling you that it's challenging to prepare and takes your time. So is there any benefit to teaching? I would say it would. There is. I've told you time and time again up here, and I'm sure Tom has said it and Todd has said it, preparing to teach you a class in here or upstairs to the high school kids or the junior high kids, I spend time preparing for it, right? Does that benefit me? Certainly does. I've got to spend time in the Word. Is that a good use of my time? Certainly is. So I benefit in that I gain in my understanding so that I'm prepared to talk to them and answer questions that they may have, right? It's a benefit to us in that sense. How about teaching others in an environment that doesn't have to feel threatening? Now, I talked about the fact of being in the adult class the first time and being really intimidated by that. Maybe you get really intimidated at the prospect of sitting in front of kids who are going to come up with some really challenging questions. I'm telling you right now, if you teach the kids, they're going to come up with questions that are going to stump you. That's okay. More than once I've told the kids in my class, that's a really good question. I don't have a good answer for you today. We'll talk about that next week, and I'll have a better answer for you. All right? So that made me go home and do a little more study and a little more research. Again, a good thing I gained in my understanding. But doing that in an environment that we don't necessarily have to feel so intimidated by, doesn't that help us when it comes to dealing with people outside the church? If I become more and more comfortable with, say, teaching kids biblical principles when it comes to interacting with my coworkers, I'm going to feel a little more comfortable about bringing that up, am I not? Or that the things I know that I can share, a benefit there as well. The last benefit I put down is getting to know the young people. If you're going to teach a children's class, getting to know the young people is an enormous benefit from teaching those classes. I'm not picking favorites, and I apologize if I leave anybody out of this list, but I just wrote down a couple of things that have struck me from the kids that I've been around, all right? So if you want to learn anything about monster trucks, Lightning McQueen, or Bluey, Oliver Forsey's your man. He can teach you all that, okay? You want to learn about speakers, 4x4s, well, ride-alongs, whatever you like to call them, or excelling in the Scouts. Jeremiah Lowry's your guy. You want to understand how a kid can excel at soccer and the violin at the same time? Millie's your girl, Millie Lowry. If you want to meet somebody who will teach you what it takes to accomplish your goals and dreams, I suggest you talk to Elizabeth Lowry, because she'll teach you what it took to earn her pilot's license before she graduated high school. If you want to learn what it takes dedication-wise to be an excellent baseball player or basketball player, Carter Brown's your guy. And in case you didn't know it, it wasn't too long ago that a young man by the name of Aiden came and asked to be baptized. And do you know who was instrumental in that? Carter Brown. Now, as great as his accomplishments at baseball and basketball are, I was so thrilled that he had taken the time to share his faith with someone, share it with Aiden, and that led Aiden to want to know more about it and to respond. Isn't that our whole purpose in teaching these kids? What a great example that was. I think about Coenetti. Coenetti comes up with the best hard questions. Some of the best classes that I've had upstairs in the high school class, I was walking in, and Cohen and I are the only ones there that day. And I look at Cohen and say, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to stay up here and have our class together, or do you want to go down to the adult class? And he'll look at me and say, well, I got some questions I'd really like answered. Can we just stay up here? I set the lesson aside. Let's deal with the questions you have, Cohen. And they were deep, serious questions about faith. What an incredible example that is, right? Not afraid to ask the hard questions or to look into them. Like I said, I'm sure I've left out a bunch. The other one I had here is, I'm sorry if you don't know them, but if Layla, Lily, and Laura McNutt run up to you and give you their big smiles and a hug, and that doesn't do anything to you in terms of making you feel good or warm your heart, boy, we really need to talk. Because if those girls smile and hug can't do something for you, I'm not sure anyone can. And those kids, they are the future of the church. I know that sounds trite. We hear that all the time. But it is the fact that they're the future of this congregation and other congregations. If we as a congregation fail to teach them the principles of faith, beginning with the milk, right? But it's got to reach the meat at some point. Hopefully by the time we're up in the high school class, we're dealing with meat. We're not still on the milk. If we don't do that, though, they're not going to be prepared to face the society we live in. And I know every society thinks it's probably the worst that times have ever been. But that's probably true because society just keeps degrading further and further and further. Kids today face challenges that I never faced as a kid in terms of pressures to do things, pressures to renounce your beliefs in terms of God. I don't mean openly, but I mean in your actions. So they're pressured more to do things that are contrary to God's will for our lives than has ever been the case by greater numbers of people, right? And sadly, not even just their peers. But we see more and more that those who we entrust to educate children, particularly like at the college level, are truly working to indoctrinate them to an idea that God doesn't exist and you don't need to do what he wants. If we don't prepare them to deal with that, they won't be prepared. They'll succumb to those teachings. We have the opportunity to build that foundation of faith with them. And I had a note here that they're the people we're going to hope generations from now or a generation from now are the leaders in the church. So hopefully they're the ones sitting up here teaching an adult class in 20, 30 years, right? So we should always strive to be good and faithful servants in all aspects of our service to God, both as individuals and collectively as a congregation. So I had a note here that if we turn to Revelation chapter 3, I'm going to change this just a little bit. So this isn't an exact reading, right? But if John were recording the book of Revelation today, would we ever want to hear this phrase? And to the angel of the church at 6th and Washington, Marietta, the words of the Amen, the faithful and the true witness, the beginning of God's creation. I know your works, that you are neither hot nor cold. Would that you were either hot or cold. But because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. Do we want to be a lukewarm congregation? This is one aspect of our service, our teaching, our Bible teaching. Do we want to be lukewarm as a congregation and not truly engage in this effort to educate and support our children and our adults for that matter, right? I'm not saying this is the only mission we have, but it is a mission we have. And if we choose to be lukewarm in any of our missions, then we become a lukewarm church. I would never want that to be said of us in terms of God judging us or Christ's judgment of us, right? So just as Tom encouraged you, Wednesday night I'm going to encourage you this morning to examine. If you've taught in the past and you need a break, I understand that. If you taught in the past and you just forgot to fill out your form, please do that and give it to Michael. He's getting really stressed. It's really hard, really challenging for him right now to schedule teachers for the classes without a fear of burning them out. Okay? If you've never done it before, give it a try. Maybe you try it and you don't like it, or maybe you try it and you find it's not your area of expertise or talent or whatever it be. So be it. But don't dismiss it just because you've never tried it. Hook up with someone who can use you as a helper and learn the ropes, get encouragement, get mentoring, and maybe it's something you'll find you love doing and you'll gain so much from. Well, that took me a half hour. But we are going to go ahead and go to Zechariah chapter 5. Before we begin, David agreed that he would start us with a prayer before our study this morning. Amen. Thank you, David. So if you'd forgotten, next week, Bill Deem is going to be with us. Bill is interested in exploring our need for a new minister and in search of a new work. And he has family here in the area and even a connection within the congregation. So he's going to be with us. He'll be teaching next Sunday morning, preaching next Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and have a fellowship meal. So there's a really good chance we're not going to get all the way through chapter 5 today, because I spent a half hour on our other topic. So what we will probably do is get as far as we can in chapter 5 today, because I had suggested to Bill that he would probably be on chapter 6 next week. So I'm sure he's been preparing for that. And if we need to, we'll circle back and finish up chapter 5 after next week, okay? Well, that didn't help. I opened to the Wednesday night study. All right, Zechariah chapter 5. Chapter 5 is going to have another vision, and it is the vision of a flying scroll. So we're going to read verses 1 through 4. Again, I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, a flying scroll. And he said to me, "What do you see?" I answered, "I see a flying scroll. Its length is 20 cubits, and its width 10 cubits. Then he said to me, "This is the curse that goes out over the face of the whole land. For everyone who steals shall be cleaned out according to what is on the one side, and everyone who swears falsely shall be cleaned out according to what is on the other side. I will send it out, declares the Lord of hosts, and it shall enter the house of the thief and the house of him who swears falsely by my name. And it shall remain in his house and consume it, both timber and stones. Get my trusty notes out here. So in verse 1, we have the sixth vision revealed in this account of Zechariah. He sees a scroll flying through the air. Might seem a little strange to us on first reading, but if we keep in mind, this was the typical way of writing in this time. Didn't have books. You had a scroll. You wrote on it. You rolled it up a little more. You just kept rolling it up as you went. Okay? So here we have this scroll that's been written on, and it's stretched all the way out off the roller. Okay, so he's seeing the whole thing. In verse 2, the angel says, this is the angel who's been guiding Zechariah through his understanding of these various visions, and we've talked about the fact that we commend Zechariah for not being a proud man and routinely asking for explanations rather than assuming he knows what's going on here. This is consistent with the experience that we see John having in the book of Revelation as he records it. There's an angel providing guidance and correct understanding. Zechariah provides additional detail in the description to the angel, including apparent size. So he says 10 cubits. So other than Lloyd and Randy, who knows what 10 cubits would be in terms of measurements we think of today? Yeah, 15 feet. Very good, thank you. So it's 15 feet wide and, 20 cubits? And the other measurement is 20 cubits, which would make it 30 feet. So this is a really big scroll. I mean, this would be like a billboard, a big billboard, right, that's written on. The scroll is the vision is apparently unrolled for Zechariah to be able to see its dimensions, which are obviously very large, but we're not to take that literally. So this isn't literally a sheepskin flying through the air that's 20 feet by 30 feet. This is figurative language. But it represents what's going to come to pass either soon or at a great speed because of the pace that it's moving. Commentators interpret it both ways. That can either mean that it's moving quickly because it's just about to happen, or it's moving quickly because when the things it talks about occur, they're going to happen at a very fast pace, not necessarily soon. Several commentators attempt to attach meaning to the specific measurements. They cite things like the Holy of Holies and so forth, saying it represents that. Again, you can take numbers and you can take symbols and you can kind of stretch them into anything you want to try to stretch them into. I don't think there's much support for that idea realistically. It's much more likely that the measurements are provided simply to convey just how far-reaching this message is. It's not going to be limited to necessarily just the people Zechariah is going to be addressing. It's going to apply to the whole world. And therefore, you have this representation of this really large document that's going to apply to a really large group of people, not just a small one. In verse 3, the angel begins to provide an explanation. Zechariah didn't even really have to ask for it this time, did he? Angels learned, and this guy, he wants me to tell him what it is. The scroll represents the curse or the judgment that's going to come from God. It's going to apply to all people, meaning the whole land. The first two chapters of Paul's letters to the Christians in Rome, he made it clear that all were subject to God's judgment. The Jew was going to be judged by the law they had been given, but the Gentiles had a law that was written on their hearts that they could see in the things around them. I'm just going to read you that text from Romans 2:14 through 16. For when Gentiles who did not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. On that day, when according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus. So Paul is saying that all men are going to be judged according to God's expectations. The Jews had an advantage because they had a written law that told them, but the Gentiles weren't going to be excused because in reality the law was written on their heart and they could observe all those things around them that pointed them to the fact that there was a creator. This was not simply happenstance. Many commentators see the two specific sins that are listed here, theft and false swearing, as representative of all types of sin. They include sin because they include sin that are committed against other men, that being stealing, and sin that is committed against God, which is represented by the false swearing. Some commentators see the two sides as being the two sides of the tablet, which God wrote the commandments on that he gave to Moses, while others see the two sides as, first side, sins committed against man, those being the ones that are recorded as failing to honor father and mother, committing murder, committing adultery, stealing, providing false witness, and coveting. Right? Side two might be the sins that are committed directly against God that don't involve our interactions with other people. That would be having other gods, creating graven images, false swearing, in other words, using the name of God in vain, or neglecting the Sabbath. As I always tell you, take that for what it's worth. You don't have to believe what I tell you. Study for yourself. And verse 4, so we'll get through this vision today. This curse or judgment will be sent out to all mankind. It will enter the house. You can't hide from it. You can't go into your house and shut the door, close the windows, stop up your chimney, and avoid it getting to you. It's going to get in your home. The people will not be hidden. And whether the sin is against God or another person, they're going to be judged for it. We need to understand, of course, this does not mean that there is no remedy for sin. We know that we are imperfect people. We continue to commit sin. If that were the case, we'd all be doomed. But Christ offers to blot out that sin on our behalf, as prophesied in Isaiah 1:18, where it's recorded. Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become like wool. So the idea here isn't that we will never sin, but a time is coming when God will judge that sin. And if we have rejected the only means to be forgiven of that sin, to have it blotted out, then we will stand and be judged in a way that we're not going to be pleased about, but is what we deserve. That finishes that vision. We're not going to move on to the woman in a basket today because we obviously don't have enough time to cover that. So I encourage you to read that, but by all means, please read chapter 6 to be ready for Bill's lesson next week, and we will circle back to verse 5 here the following week. Anybody have any comments or questions before the bell gets rung? Because Jim's standing there holding it. I can see him. There it goes. All right. Thank you for your attention.